Hello, I'm Dave Winokur, Fire Chief of the Moraga-Orinda Fire Protection District, and I'm going to share some information today about wildfire risk reduction, its intersection with insurance, and proposals that the Fire District is moving forward that are open for public comment. Fire enters the community through three pathways. The first is a vegetation to vegetation pathway. This is what we would think of as a normal wildfire, where one piece of grass or brush or timber litter ignites another piece. It spreads in a linear manner and also produces embers. And when that vegetation to vegetation fire pathway encounters a community, the built environment, homes specifically, if those homes have vulnerabilities in the form of wood-shaped roofs, non-ember resistant vents, combustible siding, and combustible material within 5 feet of the structure, what's known as zone 0, then we have the potential for a vegetation to structure transition. At this point, when structures are burning, we unlock the third pathway, which is structure to structure conflagration, where fire can spread from one structure to another. If those structures are within 50 feet of each other, structure separation distance, a structure can ignite the adjacent structure, and in doing so, it can overwhelm the defensible space and home hardening measures that we use to prevent a vegetation fire from burning the home. So there's a point of transition where a home can be prepared for a wildfire, but being exposed to the flux, the watts per meter squared over time of an adjacent structure burning. And that's what we're seeking to protect our communities against. It is also what the insurance industry is responding to, because conflagration level loss is driving unsustainable insurance payouts and increases in premiums that are causing the current crisis in our insurance market, but with regard to both access and affordability. Two studies we worked on with Nancy Watkins from Milliman and the modelers at CoreLogic. The study on the left of your screen is a mitigation credit study conducted using the community of Moraga and Orinda as a case study. And what it found is that if less than 30% of the community had carried out mitigations, there was no credit at all. And the value of those credits rose up to about an 85% ceiling, so that we see an aggregation of value when number of homes in a single block have carried out these mitigations. And the study on the right is a follow-on study we did with Milliman and CoreLogic looking at the community of Paradise, where it found with mitigations around the community, think fuel breaks or buffers, and defensible space and home hardening in the community, you could reduce risk by up to 78%. As measured by average annual loss, which is the calculation underwriters use for premium rate setting. On the left, we see what the average annual loss looks like in Paradise. I'll just suffice it to say red is bad. Those areas that have red, both on the east side and the west side of the community, those are essentially uninsurable. And to address that issue, the modelers proposed both creating 45,000 acres of buffers, shown in the diagram or the image on the right, in conjunction with defensible space and home hardening. And if those 45,000 acres of buffers plus defensible space and home hardening was carried out, we can see a massive reduction in the image on the left of the percent AAL reduction, as well as the absolute number, getting the average annual loss down below $3,000 to everywhere in the community. This is a future state in which Paradise, the epicenter of the largest loss in California history, becomes eminently insurable. And so the question is always, well, why can't we just keep doing what we're doing? Why can't we sustain the status quo? And if you look at the image on the top left, you see we can't sustain the status quo because it is failing. And if we do nothing, economic and environmental calamities will continue to unfold without our permission, and the future gets much worse. Suffice it to say, red is bad. And if you look at the top left versus the top center, we see much more red in 2040 if we don't do anything. That is a representative of a community that is completely uninsurable. So here's how we mitigate it. On the left, we see a portion of a home that has combustible mulch, combustible siding, has been exposed to 10 minutes of ember generation. That home is fully involved and is going to be a total loss. That does not matter how many firefighters you had available, that house is going to burn to the ground. And on the right, under the exact same conditions, as a result of passive pre-fire mitigations, we see a home that is unscathed by that ember storm that is washing over it. The proposal that MOFD is moving forward to establish a ember-resistant zone 0, the space within 5 feet of a structure being devoid of combustible material, would move our community into a state that looks more like that on the right. I would note this testing was carried out at the IBHS test facility in Rock Island, South Carolina in the summer. For anyone who's been to Rock Island, South Carolina in the summer, the humidity is something north of 100%. To hydrate, you just take a breath, standing in sharp contrast to fall weather in California characterized by hot, dry winds out of the northeast. Here's an example of a test carried out by CAL FIRE and IBHS in the Sacramento area. The home on the left has combustible mulch, and we see small, low-intensity flames working through the mulch on the left. Yet on the right, because of the absence of combustible material within 5 feet of structure, to include the fence, we see no flames encroaching on the house. And I'm regularly told by people who have little, if any, experience with wildfire that mulch isn't the problem because fill in the blank represents a much greater risk. But because fire is opportunistic and spreads through a network effect, it does not matter if something represents a greater risk. A risk represents a probability of the structure burning down. And the fact that there are dead trees on East Bay Mud and East Bay Parklands is interesting, but is not directly correlated to loss as mulch next to a home is. And here's what we see the result of that small, low-intensity mulch fire. Once it got into the walls of the home, it self-replicated. If you have a small hole in your roof, you have a leak, not a flood. If you have a small amount of fire in the walls of your structure, you have a total loss. Fire self-replicates once it enters the void spaces of the structure. Yet on the right, due to those passive pre-fire mitigations, the non-combustible zone within 5 feet and the metal fence, that home is unscathed. We want to move our community to something that looks more like the home on the right. So the California Department of Insurance, through its Safer from Wildfire framework, which is part of the Sustainable Insurance Strategy, has proposed a number of community and parcel level mitigations that are included in the rate filings the insurance industry has submitted and will be in effect no later than March. The fire district has carried out fuel breaks around the community. We've established fire-wise neighborhoods, and we are a wildfire mitigation community. We have done the community level things that are listed on the CDI framework. But at the parcel level, CDI recommends the following: a Class A non-combustible roof covering. Now, unless the home has a wood shake roof, it has a Class A covering in California, and there are very few wood shake roofs. It also requires a 5-foot ember resistant zone devoid of wood fences or any material that will burn. That's not currently in place in our exterior hazard abatement ordinances, and state law that was required to be in effect no later than January 1st, 2023 has not been passed and may never be passed. So the fire district has proposed establishing an ordinance that would require removal of all combustible material and wooden fences within 5 feet of the structure. Many residents have objected that this would represent a change. This would be too onerous, it would be too expensive, and it would change the appearance of our community, and in doing so would reduce the value of their homes. Now, back in 2019, when the fire district established its progressive amendments to the fire code, we included a 2-foot non-combustible zone. And at the time, we also included a provision that at the point of sale, the seller shall provide to the buyer a certificate of compliance with our exterior hazard abatement ordinance. Now, I'm not a realtor, I've never worked in the industry. I didn't know what I was doing, so I naively proposed including an escrow element, saying that if you had not done this, there would be an escrow holdover, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The Contra Costa County Association of Realtors very kindly pulled us aside behind closed doors and explained that we had no idea what we were doing and this wasn't going to work. And then they immediately pivoted to what would work, which was that a real estate transaction is a series of negotiations. They can be negotiated between the buyer and seller, and we should leave it to the buyer and seller to negotiate who carries out these mitigations. Suffice it to say, we followed that advice, and since that time, our property transfer requirement has been one of our most successful programs. And members of your association have become incredibly knowledgeable about our requirements, sometimes knowing more about the ordinance than my inspectors do. We believe there's an opportunity to harness the same partnership that brought about a meaningful introduction of our 2019 requirements and have potentially become selling points that members of the CCAR can use to sell to young families moving to Moraga and Orinda that this community is prepared for fire. We believe we can do the same thing with Zone Zero. There are options to create a non-combustible Zone Zero that look nice and could improve the saleability of the home and could decrease the probability that the buyer is unable to gain insurance, which obviously causes the deal to fall apart. So we're seeking your support for these proposals. We would encourage you, if you have an opinion or you know others who do have an opinion, to submit your comments through our website, where there is a comment form specifically about the Zone 0 requirement. An actual ordinance to require these things will be brought forward at the January meeting of the Moraga-Orinda Fire District Board of Directors and potentially go into effect as soon as March. This is the community of Betania in Chile. It's just outside of Valparaiso. I was there in March as part of a California Association of Fire Chiefs team that went down to investigate why it didn't burn. This community was exposed to fire that burned over 18,000 homes and caused several hundred deaths in the area. There were no firefighters present when fire arrived in this community. They had completed defensible space, home hardening, and other community risk reduction measures in advance of the fire's arrival. And as a result of those passive pre-fire measures, low cost, high impact, that community didn't burn. We believe our communities and others like it can be moved into this future state where they can be in or adjacent to a fire perimeter without experiencing loss. We also believe, as we move into this future state, if done to the standards promulgated by the California Department of Insurance and the Institute for Business and Home Safety, that we can get credit for these things with regard to the availability and affordability of insurance. And in doing that, we can take ourselves out of the insurance crisis that we believe is currently gripping our area. We appreciate your support of this and other measures to reduce fire risk and institute a fire-adapted future. Thank you.